Hi, I'm George. Welcome to G Makes, and this is part 2 of my lightsaber series because I want to make some lightsabers in Blender. In part 1, we made this nice lightsaber right here using geometry nodes, so we can control it. We can scale it up and down. We can do all that fun jazz. If we press play, you can see it's a little bit animated. It's got some willy wobbly energy stuff going on. Looks like an energy sword or a lightsaber. So in this part 2, we are going to focus on compositing. At the end, we might cover some extra things you can do to change the look of your lightsaber, little animation bits here and there, but this is overall going to do the basics of compositing. So make sure you have your lightsaber all set up from last time. I'm going to first get my camera in position. I like this. It could really be anywhere, but I like it in my mind as though it's like looking right on to my lightsaber, as though it's like projecting on a wall. So I'm going to grab my position on that. I'm going to set my rotation to 0 and my location to 0. And then I'm going to rotate it along the x-axis for me, 90 degrees, and then just pull that on the y, just so I can kind of scale my lightsaber how big I think it will be in my footage. And speaking of footage, let's add some. So I'm going to Shift A, I'm going to go Image as Plane. If you're doing an image sequence, you want to make sure you click Animate Image Sequences. And then if I go into Material Preview mode, we can see my footage. If I hit play, it's playing back. A couple of things to check are to make sure that your FPS matches. Mine is 29.97. That's what my DSLR records at. But the default is like 24, so just make sure that matches up with what your footage is at. We are going to go ahead and scale up my plane, because you can see how big my lightsaber is in comparison. I'm also going to move it back a bit, GY, just so it's behind my lightsaber. I'm going to go back into my camera mode, and you can see it's really small, so I'm going to scale it up. I don't have to be too exact here, because I'm going to, with my footage selected, I'm going to go into my shader editor, and I'm actually going to switch this to be not from the UV on its texture coordinates, but from the window. So that way, wherever you're looking at, it will be projected onto it. So when you're looking at it from the camera, it just fills up the camera space. It's really nice. And then I can scale the plane as big as I want, just get some overlap. If you start with an image sequence or something, you might notice that it maybe repeats along the edges. So we just want to make sure that we're sticking to clip here, not repeat. Doesn't affect anything, just looks weird. Also make sure that auto refresh is on, because if it's not, nothing will happen. And also make sure if you're doing an image sequence that you give yourself enough frames to go with. And there we go. That's the base setup. If you want, if it's a little hard to see, you can also change this texture to an emission texture, which I actually like doing. I'm not going to use this plane when I render things out, but you can see it makes it a little glowier. I can see some stuff a little better, but it's not necessary, so you can skip that step. But I just like doing it just because it gives me a little bit better view of things. So with that, let's start animating this lightsaber. Basically, it's just hand tracking. There's a quicker way to do it that's not quite as, that doesn't have as much finesse, that I'm going to cover in hopefully a much shorter, just quick tutorial. But that's not this tutorial, so stay tuned for that. Subscribe, like, comment if you want to see that. But this is just going to be for this one. So we're going to grab our base right here and move it roughly to where we want it, and same with our top right here. But to make life a little easier as we keep doing this, we're going to change a couple settings. So first of all, I don't want to be able to select my plane, my footage plane, just because I don't want to accidentally move it instead of my thing, and it just gets annoying. So I'm going to make sure that in my restriction toggles, I have this little triangle selected, which is called selectable. It should appear next to the side. I'm going to deselect either just for your footage, or I have it in a collection called footage, just so I can put anything I don't want to select in there, really. And I'm going to select that. I'll also deselect my camera so I don't accidentally select that. If you want, you can also deselect your lightsaber so you don't accidentally click on that and change some settings or whatever. And I'm going to do that, but before I do, I'm going to go to Object Properties and switch the viewport display from textured to wire. The other thing we're going to do is turn on auto keyframing right down here, auto keying. This means that if we move or scale, we won't really rotate our empties, but as we move or scale them, we don't have to hit I to keep keyframing it every time. It'll just do it automatically. Just remember you have that on though, because if you change your plane or the size of something, it might add a keyframe to that, and that can get annoying. And you might be like, why is this thing jumping all over the place? It's because there's keyframes on it. I'm going to go ahead and line this up. I'm on my frame number one, and I'll line this up at the very end. But I'm going to, again, scale this up so it kind of matches. And that this lightsaber is moving. It's just a dowel that I have like stuck into some plumbing parts. But this lightsaber is moving, so I'm lining up my blender saber with the edge of that motion blur. And nothing too exact right now because I could fine tune this later. And then I'm going to make this just slightly smaller because it's a little tapered. Move it up to that edge. Try to get as close to that bottom as I can. There we go. So that's the first of our saber, and you can see it has a keyframe down there. And now you can go every 5, every 10 frames, and just do that same thing. I mean, that's this whole process. Just going around, doing that, roughly lining it up as best you can. If you need to scale it from the top first, because that will scale the whole saber, and then you can dial in the bottom. And that's the gist of it. You do that every 10 frames, then dial it in for every 5 frames, and then dial it in for every 2 or 3. Another thing that can help is right now I'm just doing it from one perspective, so I don't super need to change it. But just in case, I often like to go to view as the way that these will transform, so I don't have to worry about it getting closer or farther away by accident. So you can go ahead and do that. You can keep it in global as long as you're moving it in the plane you're looking on. It shouldn't move too much or be different from what you want. So that's pretty much it. I'm going to go ahead and do like 2 seconds of this just so I have a base. And so I'll cut to when I'm done with that. And we're back. Sweet. So I did about 3 seconds of footage. I didn't do super exactly, but I got pretty close. There might be some tweaks if I was doing this fully as I went on and went back to it. Only took me about 5 to 6 minutes. So again, not too bad on return for investment. So if we take a look at this, we can see there we go. And there's a little jittering here or there. Again, things I could fix if I want to spend a little longer time on it, be more specific. A couple of things I am going to do is I'm going to, on my camera, I am going to change my viewport display that pass apart out, however you say that, pass part out. I'm just going to make that fully black so I don't get distracted by anything that's going on off screen. I am also going to go ahead and select my lightsaber again, objects, properties, and go to textured so I can see how it looks like with the glow. And there we go. We got a lightsaber. It's looking pretty good. And now this footage is a little actually tricky. It might not look like it because I'm just waving a stick around. But because of the way my lightsaber is, that it's got this weird like kind of disc hilt, and that this is at like a 3/4 angle. It's not quite whatever. It's not quite profile is what I meant to say there. You can see it looks like it's coming out, but like in motion it works. And especially as if I fine tune it and actually like set it at a specific spot. But if you look too closely, it starts to kind of lose it. So what I could do if I wanted to spend time fixing that is I could Shift S, cursor to selected, Shift A, mesh cylinder. And then I could rotate this. Again, I'm in view mode. So if I just go ahead and select my cylinder, make sure if you're not selecting it, make sure it's not in a collection that's not selectable. So I'll move this to my saber collection and make it selectable. First, let me scale it that way, and then I can scale it again. And maybe I get that something looking like how I want it. And then if I want to keep it just so I can see what it looks like, I can go to my lightsaber footage, add that to it. And there we go. We can see what it looks like if like that blade was cut off by this a little bit. And now if I wanted to keep that, I could, nice thing again, having these empties, is I can just parent it to the empty, and then you see it will animate along with it. And then I can go ahead and like, yeah, there's a big jump in perspective right there. Have that selected, rotate it, and really kind of get it. And if I need to move it around, I can, but then I can kind of get it animated and cut off that bottom right there. So that's really nice to do. So there we go. We got our footage. So let's quickly just render out an image to see what it looks like. Perfect. Look, we got a little lightsaber. A couple things to make sure that you're doing when you're rendering. I'm sticking an EV. We want to make sure that bloom is enabled and also that motion blur is enabled. I like putting this on end on frame, and I'll keep it at 1 step. If you have a lot of motion or want something a little smoother, doing 8 or 16 steps on that might help. Just make sure you save before, because sometimes computers and Blender doesn't like that change. And it tries to render out, it gets real funky. Other things to keep in mind are color management. The standard is filmic, and actually it will say none, but that's the same as medium contrast. I like the way lightsabers look in filmic. Standard, they look a little more like the prequels. They look a little more like that. But I like how they look with the filmic filter. And then I'll usually put them to high or very high contrast. But I don't like what this does to my footage. All right, so now we're ready for compositing. So I'm actually going to start first by hiding my footage. I don't need that rendered out. And then I'm going to make sure that this little nubbin down here is set to hold out, so that way it's transparent. So now if I just render an image real quick, we just get our lightsaber because nothing else is being rendered. Perfect. So with just that going on, I'm going to move over to the compositor space. All right, so here we are in the compositor. Make sure you use nodes as selected. And if you're not seeing anything, you might need a view node. So you can just Control-Shift-Click and grab that viewer node. But there we go. So we got our nice little layer right here of just our blade. Now I like exporting it with this one layer with transparency, one layer without, so I get the core, and then I can use a alpha or a screen or add blend mode to get the glow, because just straight alpha doesn't like glow in Blender. But if you want to see what it looks like or want to export it all as one thing, you can go ahead and grab your movie clip or your image sequence, whatever you have. Just select your footage. You might have to hit open instead of drop down. And then I'm going to use an alpha over with my lightsaber, I believe on the bottom. Yes, my lightsaber on the bottom. And there we go. If you're going to fully export from Blender, I recommend doing it this way with your render layer overlaid on top of your movie clip. That's the basis of it. But like I said, I don't like doing it this way. I like just exporting this right here, my lightsaber, and going over and exporting it as a QuickTime video or something. You can see I even have a test one right here. This is the white core because if we just, let's say, do this alpha over again, but use the alpha as a factor, it will just be exporting this right here, this core. Because alpha and light and glow and bloom do not mix. So I'll export one like I just did as a QuickTime just for consistency because I need that RGBA, and then I'll export it again. And then this one I'll do with a black background just as RGB. That way, again, I can use the add or the screen blend mode in After Effects or Premiere or even bring it back into Blender to use that on top. Now, let's go ahead and get a couple of those little details that we might want to add. Number one is going turning it on and off. I love this with the geometry nodes because it's real simple. Basically, with our lightsaber selected, back in geometry nodes, we are just going to add a trim curve right after the curve line and before the reverse curve. You can see if I control this end, woo, it's going down, and it even retains that little point, which is what I love about this GeoNode setup. But you can see it's going down, going up. You could, I guess, start it from the top. That is something you could do if you wanted. But I'm just going to find, in this footage, I kind of motion like I'll turn it on. So let's say right there, I want to animate this at 0. And maybe I'll turn off auto keyframing just so I don't mess with anything. I make sure that's selected. And then I'll go here and maybe like 5-ish frames. I'll bring that to 1. So there we go. I get a little jolt, boop. And now, again, I like doing my masking and everything in After Effects or Premiere. But you can mask just straight up footage in Blender. Or if you wanted to, you could add another plane and then put some footage from an older clip or an earlier part or just a single still image from your footage and basically mask out, animate that way. It's a real quick way to do it. But then again, it's a little more, I don't like that as much, and you don't have as much control as with just masking in Blender or using After Effects or Premiere. Let's get back to some tiddly bits that you can do with your lightsaber. So besides the open and close, which again, I love, just being able to, maybe you don't want it to be this wibbly wobbly. I've been playing a lot of Jedi Fallen Order to prepare for Star Wars Jedi: Survivor. But I'm trying to beat Fallen Order, which I haven't done before I do Survivor. And in those, the lightsabers are more like they are in New Hope, where they kind of wibble wobble, but they don't like, they're like that. So I'm going to get rid of then this whole, I don't even need this extrude mesh anymore. But now, of course, we just have a tube, which is not the thing I super enjoy on lightsabers. Because again, it looks just like an LED one. And even those have a bit of flicker. So I'm going to actually, after this minimum, which again is controlling the width of our blade, at least partly, I'm going to add another math node. right there, and then a random value node. And then we're going to plug that in, but as you'll see, it still gives us that wibbly wobbliness, which is not what we want. Instead, what I want is to use, I believe it's factor is going to do this for us. Yeah, factor. And then grab a scene time, plug that frame in, and that's looking at real wonky. Blah, 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 blah. So I want to make sure this, like, max is like 1.1 and my minimum's like 0.9. That's going to be real chunky, boy. And that's because I'm on add right now. I actually want to switch this to multiply. There we go. That looks a little better. But there we go. So now we can see we get that flicker. You can make that gap wider of the variation, and that's possible. And you get more like it's like that spinning around rod. That's just a look I really like. Again, adding that little variation energy, but maybe this one's not broken or cracked. It's just an energy sword. This is kind of more like how the Fallen Order lightsabers look. So yeah, that's kind of some of the things you can do. Other little random things are you can add like sparks, you can add particle system, you can add something like, you can add another cylinder that's combined into a whole bunch of stuff to get it basically like a loop or like around bits on it, so it looks like sparks spewing out of it, but it's not. Kind of like Kylo Ren style. And yeah, so that's it. That's been compositing lightsabers. You can also mess with the emission texture, all that jazz. Lots of control, lots of fun. Any color you want. Lightsabers under the sun. So that's it. That's been part 2 of this lightsaber series. A little bit of a composition. Hopefully you learned some tips, some tricks. Figure out your own method for doing this, your own workflow. If you have any questions, comments, or anything you'd like to see in the future, make sure to leave a comment below in the comments. And if you like this video, please like it. And I'll catch you next time. Peace.
Ooh.